all of a sudden this next sentence has nothing to do with what we did previously. What we've been looking at are instances of market failure. That is, times when the market fails to produce a quantity where price equals marginal cost and average total costs are minimized. The first thing we looked at was instances where the market moves away from perfect competition. So we had monopoly, oligopoly, which will lead to Econ 121, and monopolistic competition are all instances of imperfect competition where we move away from the assumption of perfect competition. We wind up not producing at the minimum of average total costs. So we have what's officially called market failure. It's not that the markets, again, market failure doesn't mean the market sees up and cease to produce. It means they're not producing a quantity where price equals marginal cost and ATC is minimized. Another instance of when we have market failure, that is, we don't produce the quantity where price equals marginal cost and average total costs are minimized, is in the existence of what economists call externalities. Externalities. Externalities occur when your activity affects someone else. When your activity affects someone else, we say that there are externalities. There can be negative externalities, in which case there is some cost that is borne by others. People who are not a party to the transaction are bearing some sort of cost as a result of the transaction. We say that's an instance of negative externalities. We can have positive externalities, which is when there's some benefit that's received by people who are not a party to the transaction. Negative and positive externalities are, again, examples of times when markets fail to produce the quantity where price equals marginal cost and ATC is minimized. Okay, let's do some clicker questions. When somebody buys an abandoned home, so we saw those pictures of Detroit earlier in the semester. Suppose somebody buys one of those abandoned homes, fixes it up, and occupies it. These actions are an example of A, positive externality, B, negative externality, C, no externality, D, all of the above, E, none of the above. Somebody buys an abandoned home, fixes it up, and moves into it. A, B, C, D, or E. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. Positive externality. It's really important to keep in mind that someone can personally benefit from their actions. So somebody who buys the abandoned home, fixes it up, and lives in it, sure, they're going to benefit. They're going to have some economic gain from having done that. That doesn't mean there's no positive externality, right? So the creation of positive externality, the benefit to others. So in this example, that neighborhood is now going to be a better neighborhood, right? Because abandoned houses create blight. Blight leads to additional crime. And also other bad effects from blight, like people get depressed in the neighborhood. And those things disappear, not disappear, those things are mitigated when people start buying abandoned houses and fixing them up and living in them. Having a positive externality doesn't mean the individual involved in the transaction isn't getting any personal gain. It means that society is gaining as well. That there are people beyond, in addition to that individual, who are also gaining. So doing this is an example of a positive externality. 63% get the happy, oopsie, make it a happier face. There's a happy face. All right, let's try another one. When someone chooses not to have their child vaccinated, so all those vaccinations you got to get before you start kindergarten, or college. When someone chooses not to have their child vaccinated, the absence of a vaccination is an instance of positive, negative, no externality, all of the above, none of the above. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. You nailed that one. All right. 91% get the happy face on that one. It's an example of a negative externality because when someone gets a communicable disease, that's a cost that's going to be borne not just by the individual who gets the communicable disease, but by others who are exposed to that disease. Even others who may have had their shots. My niece had her sons are now 5, but they were born 3 months premature, which means they had very underdeveloped lungs when they were born, and they were about this big. And little babies that size are not pretty. They lived the first 2 years of their life in their home with no one other than their parents and grandparents allowed to enter the home. Because even though they could get their shots, their vulnerability to diseases and their vulnerability to people who were not inoculated for other diseases meant that those children could have died if they had been exposed to anybody who got one of those diseases that we all get vaccinated for. So negative externality, the impact of one's behavior, negative effect of the behavior on someone else. Lots of examples. Sure, what the heck, let's do it. Talk to the person next to you and come up with one example of a positive externality and one example of a negative externality. So a behavior that generates positive externalities and a behavior that generates negative externalities. Take about 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Can you even add them?
I don't think so, but I never want to say absolutely no. All right, so there we go. Let's see what we got. I'm way over here on the side. So who has an example? Of course. Who that's close to me has an example? There. Don't do the one. Do one. Do a clean one. Yeah.
Car. We're driving a car.
And what's the negative externality from driving a car?
Pollution.
Creates pollution. All right. So driving a car is an activity that has personal costs, right? So you have personal costs from driving your car, but there are additional costs that the rest of us have to bear in the form of pollution. So that's a good example of a negative externality. I'm not going to write them up there because I'm walking around. Anybody else on this side who wants to give an example? Oh, right down there. No. Awesome. Pass this down, please. Well, you can do it this way, but my sign is not as good as it used to be when I was taking a class.
Smoking.
Negative or positive?
Negative.
Negative. And what's the nature of the negative externality?
Secondhand smoke.
Okay. So smoking is something, there's a personal cost involved, the cost of buying cigarettes, but there's a social cost, which is the secondhand smoke. Okay. Yeah, somebody, wait, I did wear the right shoes for running. Hold on. There. I have the wrong shoes on for running. Where was the person over here who I said I'm way over here? Ooh, somebody. Do you have one? No? Nope. Got an example? Okay, here we go. I knew we'd get more. There you go.
I said that. Wait, are you still doing negative?
We're doing either one.
Okay, I said that Cal football games are create positive externalities
Okay.
because every single business in Berkeley benefits when there's a home football game.
Absolutely. Good example. So the home football, did you see the tweet I put out on Saturday of the person selling bottled water outside the stadium? Was that anybody in the class? The people that were selling bottled water? They were busy doing transactions, so I just took a picture and posted it on Twitter. But I didn't stop and ask if it was somebody in the class. Anyway, absolutely. So the football game generates lots of positive externalities because there's a lot of other business for all the restaurants and bars and so on in town. Okay, who else? Another one. Let's do one more. How am I doing on time? I'm doing good. Oh, really? 720 people. There's only 3 people that came up with examples. What'd you come up with? It's because the microphone is scary.
My roommate bought a megaphone, and I think it's a negative externality.
And what's that? Yes, your roommate's megaphone. And the nature of the negative externality is?
It really annoys like everyone in the house.
It annoys everyone in the house, right? So everybody else is having to bear the cost of all of this noise. Right, let me put my shoes back on. Oops. Good. All right. So what we've got is with positive externalities, like the example of the football game, with positive externalities, there are benefits that accrue to people who are neither the buyer nor the seller. So there are benefits that accrue to the restaurants and stores in Berkeley. Those people are not the seller. They're not Cal football. And they're not the buyer. They're not the people who are going to the football game. They are benefiting from that activity. Another example is, my favorite example, is education. The purchase, if you will, of education, that's a transaction between you and the University of California at Berkeley. There are others who will benefit from your education. So yeah, you may have a higher income when you're 30 than you would have had if you hadn't gone to college. That's your private benefit. But there are additional benefits that the rest of us reap from having an educated society. We have higher voter participation rates when there's a higher educational attainment. There is less crime in communities that have higher levels of educational attainment. People who are getting degrees here may well be inventing things. They may be taking their knowledge out and using it to work for the Peace Corps. The University of California at Berkeley sends more people to the Peace Corps than any other university or college in the world, and so on. So the terms that we need, we talk about the private marginal benefit, and we can use PMB to stand for private marginal benefit. That's the marginal benefit, the additional benefit to the individual who is, in this case, buying whatever the product is. So if we're talking about the football game, the private marginal benefit is what the individual who's buying a football ticket, what's their personal marginal benefit from going to one more game. The external marginal benefit, we can use EB for external benefit. We can use MEB for marginal external benefit. Yes, I know that's in a different order, but everybody who does this has different orders for these words. We could probably do EMB, although I've never seen anybody use that shorthand. The marginal external benefit, that's the additional benefit from each additional quantity, so each additional ticket for the football game, each additional educated person for education. The additional benefit that accrues to society. So the marginal external benefit or the external marginal benefit, that's the benefit that accrues to society. So in the example of the football game, it's the benefit to the shops and restaurants in Berkeley as a result of having that much foot traffic in town on a Saturday. And then the sum of, the sum of those two things is the social marginal benefit, SMB, or sometimes it's called marginal social benefit, so it may be MSB. Don't get hung up on what order these words are in. The social marginal benefit is the sum of these two things. So it's the private marginal benefit plus the external benefit is the sum, and that's society's total benefit. So we've got the individual who bought the football ticket, we've got the rest of the Berkeley community, external, combine all that, you get the social marginal benefit. So if we look at it in a picture, the picture looks pretty much like this. So we're going to put stuff measured in dollars on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. And we've got some downward sloping private marginal benefit. So that's equivalent to the demand curve when we were talking about things like buying 6-ounce cups of yogurt. The private marginal benefit, we've got some upward sloping marginal cost curve if it's an individual firm, or a supply curve if it's a market. So we'll just say supply there to make it clear what we're talking about. And if we don't take into account the external marginal benefit, the quantity that we'll wind up with is where the private marginal benefit and the marginal cost intersect. We'll call that Q private, PR for private, how's that? And that'll be sold at the equilibrium price. We'll call that P sub private, PRIV, for private, at the private price. But suppose this is like the football game, something where there is an external benefit. That external benefit, we're going to add on to the private marginal benefit, and so that amount we're shifting up by is equal to the external benefit. And when we add the external benefit to the private marginal benefit, we get the sum is the social marginal benefit. So that's the PMB plus the external benefit. So the social marginal benefit takes into account as well, not just the benefits accrued by the people who go to the game, but also takes into account the benefits of all the shops and restaurants in Berkeley that benefit by having so much foot traffic around, including the people who were selling ice-cold bottled water out of a cooler right across from the entrance to the stadium on Saturday, and perhaps earning economic profit because there weren't very many people doing that, and it was really hot. Just saying. Okay. It was my entrepreneurial hint for the semester, but there you go. Okay. If the market, in this case for Cal football tickets, if the market took into account the marginal external benefit, then what we would have is we would have a higher quantity produced. We'll call it Q sub social for social quantity. The socially optimal quantity would be where the social marginal benefit crosses the marginal cost curve, and it would be sold at a higher price. So the social price would be where the social marginal benefit curve crosses the marginal cost curve. The market, left to its own devices, will produce too little. The market left to its own devices will produce too little of those products that have a positive externality. We should have had more people, because if we take into account the social benefit, we should have more people wandering the streets of Berkeley on Saturday. Now, negative externality. A negative externality is when there are additional costs that are borne by people other than those people who are party to the transaction. So we had two examples over here. We had driving cars and pollution. We had smoking and secondhand smoke. And we had the megaphone, the roommate with the new megaphone. It's a frightening product for a roommate to have. Private marginal cost, we'll call it PMC, or you can just call it MC. It's the same as the marginal cost curve we've been talking about. Those are the marginal costs incurred by the parties to the transaction. So the private marginal cost for cigarettes would be the private marginal cost of selling packs of cigarettes. The private marginal cost for, what was the other one? Driving would be the additional cost of driving and so on. The marginal damage cost, MDC for marginal damage cost, that's the cost that's borne by society. That's the additional cost that society bears. That's the pollution, that's the secondhand smoke, that's the annoyance from the roommate. And the social marginal cost is the sum of those things. So the private marginal cost plus the marginal damage cost gives us the social marginal cost, the sum of those two things. If we were to draw in a picture would look like this. Stuff measured in dollars on the vertical axis, quantities on the horizontal axis, downward sloping marginal benefit curve, MB, upward sloping private marginal cost curve, PMC, find the intersection, dash it down. That's the private optimal quantity dash it over, that's the private optimal, the private optimal price and quantity are where the same thing that we've had all the way along, where the private marginal cost and the marginal benefit curves intersect. But if this is a market in which there are damage costs, in which there is some negative externality, then there's some marginal damage cost. There go those pens, changing colors. There is some marginal damage cost that shifts up the marginal cost curve, so we get a social marginal cost curve, SMC, that's the sum of the private marginal cost and that amount that we're shifting up by the marginal damage cost. If the market were to take into account those social costs, the market would produce a quantity where the social marginal cost curve intersects the marginal benefit, so we'd have the, I'll call it Q-soc. The socially optimal quantity would be a lower quantity, and again, it would be sold at T-soc at a higher price. The private market, left to its own devices, produces too much of goods or services that have negative externalities. Now, one solution, one policy that can be used to address these two problems associated with externalities is subsidies in the case of a positive externality, or taxes in the case of a negative externality. We can provide a subsidy. The shops and restaurants could subsidize the cost of football tickets to get more people in town. We tax those activities with negative externalities. We have cigarette taxes. We have alcohol taxes. Perhaps we should have megaphone taxes. Oh, you all want to go, and I always want my last minute. But government intervention is not always necessary, because sometimes there is a solution that's possible without government intervention, and that's what we'll start on Wednesday. Bye.
Next, inequality are the values of entry.